Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ITSS member series on crime, extremism, and terrorism. My name is Isabel, and together with my colleagues Camilla and Shams, we have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Reinhold Gallmetzer to talk about environmental crime. Reinhold Gallmetzer is an appeals counsel at the Office of the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. He founded the Center for Climate Crime Analysis, where he serves as the chairperson of the board of directors. Previously, Reinhold served as an associate legal officer at the International Criminal Tribunal for former Yugoslavia, as judicial training officer with the Organization for Security of Cooperation in Europe, and as a consultant to the Defense Office of the State Court in Sarajevo. He studied law in Innsbruck, in Austria, Padova, Italy, and in Glasgow, Scotland, and was also awarded a master's degree in classical music from the Conservatory of L'Aquila in Italy. Welcome to this video podcast, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
So our first question for today is, what led you to establish the Center for Climate Crime Analysis?
The Center for Climate Crime Analysis, or CCCA, is an organization founded by fellow prosecutors and law enforcement experts with the aim to tackling illegal conduct that is relevant to climate change. We have noticed that a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions are either directly or indirectly related to illegal conduct, including criminal conduct in some instances, but that those laws are not sufficiently enforced. And in order to enable the third branch of government, that is law enforcement, the judiciary, to play an active and coordinated role in tackling the climate crisis, CCCA is intended to empower them by providing them with strong evidence and support, which will enable them to bring more cases and to win cases, to strategically bring cases that will have an impact in tackling those emissions that are related to illegal conduct.
Thank you for your commitment and for your answer as well. So could you please give us your definition of what is environmental crime and how it has evolved globally in the past decades, maybe?
Well, environmental crime, very broadly speaking, is conduct that is sanctioned by criminal law and affects the natural environment. But when we talk about environmental crime in the context of CCCA, we take a broader approach to it. We don't only focus on criminal legislation, but also on non-criminal statutes that are relevant to tackling the same underlying conduct. So in that sense, environmental crime, of course, technically speaking, it violates criminal law, but if we want to really see how we can best address it, we should look at the law in an integrated fashion, to also look at civil laws, regulatory laws, sanction mechanisms, human rights laws, constitutional laws, all of which together may be able to address underlying conduct, illegal conduct that affects the natural environment. I think that is very important from a practitioner's perspective to really have an impact and to trigger change. Now, going back to the definition itself, there are some legal provisions, criminal provisions, that really focus directly on they're designed directly to protect the natural environment or aspects of it. Examples of these are laws with regards to poaching. Right, it's illegal to kill an animal that is protected, for example, by the CITES Convention. Polluting, it's illegal to dispose of certain pollutants in the natural environment. The same with destroying forests or illegal fishing. So these are specific laws, often criminal laws, but also other laws designed directly to protect the natural environment. But again, I think it's important to look broader, to look at derivative illegal conduct or criminal conduct that facilitates the destruction of the environment. And here one really needs to think out of the box and not to limit ourselves to those particular laws that have nature or the natural environment into their language itself. And I can give you some examples. There are laws that prohibit the trafficking of illegally sourced commodities such as wildlife or timber or fish. Right? They are not primarily designed or not always designed to protect the environment, but trafficking of illegal commodities can be, if enforced properly, can be an effective way to tackle the underlying crime or illegal conduct that is killing of the elephant or illegally deforesting areas in the Amazon rainforest. Then we have corruption laws that also can be invoked very effectively. If we look at the broader context in which those crimes are committed, often they do involve these crimes or financial crimes such as money laundering. And then, unfortunately, very often we also see that environmental crimes go hand in hand with human rights violations. They directly affect people living in the areas, indigenous people often. And therefore, if we want to effectively tackle the underlying conduct again and repeat, we need to look at criminal conduct or illegal conduct in the broadest possible way. And then on a case-by-case basis, we need to see what are the best tools available to us, what are the applicable jurisdictions that we can invoke, what is the evidence that we have, and then we can decide how to best and most effectively those responsible for environmental destruction and those who indirectly drive it through financial means, through the trade in commodities, etc. Now you're asking how it has evolved, right? Environmental crime has become more and more prominent. Actually, it's becoming, or it has already become, an extremely lucrative business by those who carry it out or those who otherwise benefit from it. According to Interpol and the United Nations Environmental Program, environmental crime is now the fourth largest crime category in the world. So this shows that this is not just a side category that is nice to address, but it is really it goes to how criminal organizations finance themselves, how they profit, and it has a tremendous impact on all of us. Law enforcement authorities often like to focus on crimes that directly impact on humans or property, for that. But less often do they focus on environmental crime. But we need to acknowledge that the natural environment is the foundation of human life. We cannot live, our societies and our civilization cannot exist unless we protect the natural environment. And this now takes me back to the first question. This is exactly why I've set up the Center for Climate Crime Analysis. I do believe that the climate crisis is the most pressing challenge of our generation, and we need to use everything that we have in our civilization, including, among many, many other means, we need to use law enforcement and the third branch of government to contribute to it. It is not good enough for law enforcement to only look at violent crimes against property crimes, etc. We need to see what is the bigger picture that may even exacerbate other criminality, or if not tackled properly, threatens human life, and it threatens the continuation of our civilization. And I believe that is exactly the case when we talk about the climate crisis. So unfortunately, however, environmental crime and also crime that is related to the climate crisis or other illegal conduct, again, using the term crime in a broader context, is not sufficiently enforced. And these crimes are notoriously under-prosecuted. There are several reasons for they are, if we look at the plain fact, they are simply not prioritized by law enforcement. Governments also underfund often those authorities that are responsible for enforcing these laws, which forces those to focus on a number of small number of cases that they can relatively easy enforce, rather than looking at the big picture. Also, it is a reality that in order to effectively enforce these laws, it is often difficult to get access to the underlying evidence, and no enforcement will be successful unless it is supported by evidence. And then again, if we go back a step, there is underreporting. It is also not always the priority in the minds of civil society. If societies act stronger collectively and stronger in response to other types of criminality, and it is perhaps not yet in the public conscious that these crimes deserve our attention, deserve our priority as a society as a whole.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Our next question is about transnationality, and in particular, based on your experience, does the transnationality of such crimes represent a hindrance to the pursuit of justice?
Yes, that touches exactly on one of the issues that we have discussed before. Environmental crimes, especially if we're focusing on these derivative crimes, they're difficult to enforce, and that is because the underlying conduct takes place in more than one country. And therefore, a national law enforcement authority that is primarily focused with investigating conduct on the territory in which they have jurisdiction, that is, that country, often has difficulties accessing information from other countries. Now, obviously, there are international cooperation agreements between countries in terms of mutual legal assistance, but they don't work as effectively as they should. While within Europe we have institutions that facilitate it, we have Europol, we have Eurojust. When we talk about criminality that concerns a country as continents, this even becomes more difficult because there our institutions are, and laws for that matter, are not very effective. So to give you a couple of examples to illustrate this. In Europe, we have a piece of legislation called the European Union Timber Regulation. That piece of legislation that is enacted in all 27 member states, including also in their criminal law, it outlaws the import of illegally sourced timber or timber proceeds into the European Union market. Now, those competent to enforce these laws are the European criminal authorities and also some administrative regulatory authorities in relation to part of the conduct. The problem is that for the European authorities, let's take, for example, the authorities in the Netherlands, they will find it extremely difficult to tell whether a shipment coming from Brazil, and that includes timber, they find it very difficult to ascertain whether the timber is in fact lawfully or unlawfully sourced. The import documents will, of course, not indicate an obvious illegality, and without access to information from the state of origin, the European authorities effectively are incapable of enforcing the European Union timber regulation. And this also shows that, or explains rather, that although this law has been enforced for half a dozen years, there have been very, very few cases. You can count them on one hand. And so what is needed really is that European authorities are provided with information and support that shows them that the origin of the timber and links the timber to unlawful conduct. And this is what CCCA is doing. We are working in Brazil to not only detect the unlawful deforestation through satellite imagery analysis and linking it to other data sets, including land registers, but we are able to track the supply chain of the timber from the origin to the sawmills, to the export markets, and then also to European import markets. And only by conducting all of that investigation and analysis in a manner that the European authorities can actually use, only then is there a realistic chance that the laws in Europe can be effectively enforced. Perhaps speaking more broadly, and again, relying on non-criminal conduct, I can make another example. In Europe, we are getting new laws that oblige European corporations to exercise due diligence in their supply chains. France was the first country who has enacted it, Loi de la Vigilance. And now this is also being done at the European level, and the law will enter into force in 2024, which basically obliges all European companies, including banks, to exercise due diligence to ensure that in their supply chain or in their portfolio, there are no links in that particular case to deforestation commodities or to actors that are responsible for deforestation. And this is potentially an extremely powerful piece of legislation. It's civil legislation, not criminal. It is very powerful, but its effect really hinges on the ability of the European authorities to enforce violations of the law. And again, I believe that here it is extremely important that the authorities are provided with assistance and support to do so, for the reasons that we have discussed before, because otherwise they will simply be unable to proceed due to a lack of access to the relevant information, and as a result of the transnationality of the conduct and the availability of information, not only in one country, but in multiple countries. Now, together with a number of partner organizations, civil society organizations in France, we have, CCCA, we have investigated the supply chain of a French supermarket chain called Casino. And we established that Casino, who is one of the largest supermarket chains in Brazil and in Colombia, sources cattle from illegally deforested areas in the Amazon. Cattle, I should add, or the production of cattle is the main driver in the Amazon of deforestation. And that is because forest is converted into grazing land for cattle. And this is in 95% of instances illegal. So what we have done is we used remote sensing data to detect instances of deforestation. We connected this with land records to ascertain which farms own the land or claim to own the land, and whether it is legal or illegal. Basically, is there a permit of deforestation or not? And also, if in case the deforestation was done on protected land or on indigenous land, obviously it would be illegal in the first place. And then we tracked the supply chain of the cattle that was produced on that land to the slaughterhouses, to the meat packing companies, and then further to the supermarket chains, and to the supermarkets in which the meat is sold. And we showed that casino supermarkets, in fact, sell illegally sourced meat. And on that basis, we provided this information to our partner organizations, and they have brought a case in France against a casino supermarket for failing to exercise their due diligence in their supply chain. Now, this case is ongoing, but it has already had a positive effect. And that is another French supermarket chain, that is Carrefour, has the same supply chain. Its supply chain with beef also involves the same meat packing companies in Brazil that source cattle from illegally deforested land. So because of the casino case, Carrefour has realized that there is a legal and also a reputation and financial risk of as a result of that case, and they have now voluntarily and spontaneously declared that they will no longer source beef or meat from those slaughterhouses that have been established to source cattle from illegally deforested land. So this would not happen unless civil society actors intervened and provided the authorities who are in charge of enforcing the law with the information that is needed to do so effectively.
Thank you. So now that we talked a bit about transnationality, on a similar line, we would like to ask you what, in your view, are the main obstacles in prosecuting cases related to environmental crime, and how can we, as individuals, how can we contribute to this process?
I believe that the main reason is not that we don't have laws, right? Let me exclude a few reasons. We do have laws. And now the laws could be better in some cases, and especially in Europe, but also in parts of North America, new laws are being created that can be effectively enforced with a view to protecting the environment and the climate. So that's a good thing. But we do already have laws. The problem is the lack of enforcement. And here, as I said before, the main reason really is because those that are responsible for the enforcement, they lack access to quantity and the quality of information that they would need to enforce the law, and they need support to do so. And this is exactly then where civil society can play an extremely important role. As I'm not talking about each individual, but individuals being organized, and that is really important. We as civil society, we have unprecedented abilities to collect, to analyze, to generate, and to share information across borders in a way that law enforcement organizations often cannot. If we organize ourselves, we are able now to access information in a way that law enforcement often cannot. And that has several reasons, because we collectively, I would say, civil society organization, has more expertise and better access to information, timely access to information when illegal conduct takes place, and more expertise, technical, scientific expertise to do so. We are also not limited by procedural restrictions to share information across borders. We can communicate with a mouse click, we can share information, and we can, if analyzed properly against applicable legal standards, we can produce, well, first collect information, analyze it, and make information available to law enforcement authorities in a way that they can directly use it for their enforcement action. And again, this is exactly what CCCA is doing. We are operating with broad networks of civil society. This can be local indigenous organizations that have the best knowledge of their own environment, of the facts on the ground. We work together with local NGOs, work with international NGOs, with scientific institutions, technology experts, with international NGOs that help in litigation. So this is what we do. We mobilize and coordinate civil society with a view to collecting and analyzing the right information and making it available to law enforcement in a very strategic way, because we select and target our cases with a view to having an impact in changing behavior on the ground. So I think civil society increasingly plays a very important role. And law enforcement, I can tell you, on the other hand, appreciates this. They are perfectly aware of the limitations, but when receiving information from civil society, for them, it's important to receive high quality information. It is not enough to have some shreds of information and to launch a public campaign and to put pressure on law enforcement. That does not help them. Law enforcement need real evidence and real support. And if they're offered that, I've experienced that without exception, that law enforcement embraces it and is actually will act upon this kind of support if it really enables them to enforce the law.
Thank you. Thank you for your reply. This marks the end of our video podcast. Mr. Gallmetzer, I'd like to thank you once again for joining us and for having accepted our invitation for this interview. And your knowledge is very, very much appreciated. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure to meet you and to speak to you.